Good evening, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is October 6th, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We had an OCDC guy who was a troll who gets very upset when I don't say it correctly. But I'm here in sunny Sacramento, state capital of California. So we're on Pacific time here. Yes, indeed. Going worldwide, I have an incredible talk for you today. I was preparing for it, finding new different connections, important ones, right up into the minute before the broadcast here. And today's title, of course, is Horror and the Hypno-Programming of America. Stay tuned. This is not going to be one of those cliched ooh type of programs. I'm going to be bringing in new insights here that go beyond the clickbait nature of the title. And it's important, not just because of the new information here, but I'm also trying to inspire newer researchers to get beyond the Google stage and get beyond just sort of the canned programming that's there. It's just leading us not even into a dead end. If we were a dead end, at least we know how to back up. But it's just going into like a maze, like a corn maze, right? It's not leading anywhere. I want to encourage people to follow new areas of research. I think I'll just give you one specific example. I think if we could, I think this person here is due for it. If Edward Lansdale has a couple of biographies written about him. If James Jesus Angleton has 2 or 3 biographies, full-length book, monograph length monographs. I think certainly Dr. William J. Bryan Jr. Is deserving of such treatment. And hopefully through these talks, I'm going to be inspiring younger researchers, not just chronological age, you can be whatever age, but people who want to make unique and original contributions. William J. Bryan Jr. Some of you may know who he is. I'd be surprised, but I had come across his name in different contexts prior to this prep here that I was doing for this talk. But I really got a much deeper insight on the pivotal nature of Dr. Bryan to what I call the hypno-programming of America. And I don't just mean that as metaphorically. I don't just mean it as drama clickbait. I mean it as literal. I'm just using hypno-programming as a convenient nonce word so that you can come into the tent and see what I have to offer you today in this freak show. So I'm going to be exploring, because I like to deal with specifics here, and I like to draw from the popular culture, primarily because it's a touchstone that most of us are acquainted with. We've all seen the cheapy movies from the, I guess, mid-'60s, late '50s, certainly. Remember the drive-in theaters? Maybe you don't. You might be too young, but this was the content of drive-in theaters. That's why there was a lot of horror. That's why there was a lot of fright involved. That's why there are all these really sexy women who are in danger, and then these young men who are going to protect them. It's a really good scenario if you're on a date out there at the drive-in theater. But there were also the stuff of television, right? The point I'm making is that this material here is so omnipresent that we've almost become oblivious to it. And that's the most effective type of programming, right? When a jingle or a saying, a meme, Ali Alexander, are you watching? Yeah. I never thought I'd see the day when a jingle meister would gain adulation for coming up with half-ass memes like "Stop the steal." All right, but that's how far we've descended, and I'm trying to break the hypno-programming, including our susceptibility to people who jump to the front of the marathon. They hop on the bus and they push themselves out in front, like on January 6th. whereas people like myself and my predecessors have been doing this work for decades. We've been running the marathon, but we have this guy who jumps the queue and presents himself as a hero. I don't think he spent a single day in jail. Who knows who he's with? But he's definitely been influenced by neuro-linguistic programming, which we'll talk about today. I just found this connection probably 5 minutes before I went live here. Okay, and I have lots of clips for you. Hang on, lots of still pictures that help me to advance my argument. So my strategy today is to connect Roger Corman, and if you don't know who that is, I'll talk a little bit about him in a moment, but most of you do. You've seen his movies. You may not know his name, but he's the figure that's behind, not just in his own right, a very prolific director, producer, and distributor, and commentator. And I was reminded in preparing for this talk today that he does come from a background that reeks of British intelligence. All right, and I'll get to the specifics in a moment. You know his work, you might not know his name. You know his progeny, the people who have interned with him, worked with him, volunteered, people whose careers have eclipsed, I'd have to say, even that of Roger Corman. He has no problem with it because that's what his job was, is to train this new generation of cinema hypno-programmers, otherwise known as film directors, people from Joe Dante, Gremlins, remember that scary one, to someone like who's a auteur, right? Francis Ford Coppola. And in prepping for this talk today, I found it on Amazon Prime. I'm not a stockholder of Bezos.com, but if you want to see it, it's there. I watched it last night from beginning to end. It's only 70 minutes, so it wasn't that big of an investment. But it was a good film. It was low budget, but very well done. It's the very first feature film that Francis Ford Coppola directed. And the person who produced it, that has got the money together, was none other than Roger Corman. And it was directed in Ireland, right? Because we're talking about a British operation here. I think that's where the connection is. And we're talking about the Anglo-American British PSYOP as we know it. I call it hypno-programming of America. It's part of the demoralizing of those of you who watch my talks here or have seen me know the context. I always remind people that Peter Dale Scott is not an American. He's a professor of standing at UC Berkeley that I could never really understand. He's a mediocre poet. He quote unquote, he has written these books on assassination, but he's a Canadian subject, and he writes nothing about his home country, right? People like that, and you've heard me complain about people like Trevor Noah and all these other characters, Five Eyes, right? Indie people, but that's part of the demoralization, or more properly, deconstruction, I guess you could say it, of the American mindset, if you want to call it, the American economy, the American society and culture. And I know it's more complex than that. But I'm just saying that there have been consistent, especially since World War I, and in the post-war in specific, a concerted attack on the psyche. And of course, as we know by now, media is right in the central pocket of these organizations. I'm not telling you anything new, but I'm going to show you the subtleties that are involved here. And I want to point out some key figures who need to be examined. One of them I've already mentioned, William J. Bryan. And it's not just a sort of a fun excursion into the popular culture, right? Some of you may think that it's kind of trivial and there weren't really any consequences to looking at the cool corn maze in Dixon, California, and the corn maze craze that has taken over ever since Children of the Corn, Stephen King. But if you see that whole fear of nature, of corn, of our sustenance, has done to an entire generation of children, also scaring them that they're going to be dead by age 18 anyway, which is one of the key premises of Children of the Corn, then you're going to forget that Sally Schmidt was the person who founded, yes, French Laundry, not Thomas Keller. And to his credit, he does give Sally Keller and her husband recognition for founding, and she's a UC Davis graduate in home economics. Most of you missed that part, right? Because I want to say there are those forces that abound that we don't talk about because we fall too easily into this hypno-programmatic state, this hypnagogic state of permanent demoralization. And unless we break out of it, it doesn't matter if Glass-Steagall is brought in, doesn't matter if we find out the physics of the 9/11 towers going down, right? It doesn't matter unless we break out of this process that has affected our frontal cortex, right? It's affected our executive functions, as they're called. You can tell I've been reading in this area, and I was inspired to do this talk by going to the local grocery store. It's Nugget up here is the big one. And there was this guy in front of me in line. He's like 6'9", big, huge, hulking guy, wearing a mask still. And somehow he thought I was standing too close to him in the line, in the queue, while he was fumbling with his card, which he could barely use because, maybe he has something flowing into his brains that's gradually eating it. I don't know. But anyway, I was taken aback by this, and he told me to back off. And I said, I'm far enough back because when I'm in public, I just don't take any shit from anybody. Especially I'm gonna go grocery shopping. I'm not gonna be bossed around. By the way, he wasn't the only zombie that I was running into. There's people just, there's huge ass aisles, right? Because you got a lot of huge ass people walking around these days because they've been eating GM corn all their life and drinking a lot of high fructose corn syrup drinks. She still runs into me. She still backs into me, right? So I said, oh my gosh, the executive function is, I'm seeing it all around. And anyway, that might be you might be used to that type of behavior. I'm not. I'm a boomer. I'm used to people when they were normal sized, before McDonald's and Jack in the Box and all that, and before the supermarkets. I was, not much younger than Sally Schmidt. The grocery store was something that you would go to just, not to stock up your whole week's worth of food. It's just something. It was more like a convenience. Anyway, I won't belabor that point. So but I hearken back to the previous Tuesday so that you'll get your head in the right space. I'm not just talking about Roger Corman, drive-in movies, and all Vincent Price and Peter Lorre and Christopher Lee and all these horror people, okay? It's beyond that, if you'll bear with me. In fact, I'm connecting the Roger Corman psych job, the Hypno-Programming, that whole milieu that he's created with political assassination, including that of our beloved presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy. And I won't go through the scenario. There's tons of documentaries, books, feature films, articles that you can refer to. Most of us have at least a dim memory of it. But and it's not ancient history. Just this year, 2022, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, who was the accused assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, who had just won the California state primary before he was assassinated, and altering the course of American and world history. I don't have to add. Sirhan Bishara Sirhan came up for parole today and was finally granted. Out of 16 attempts going before the California State Parole Board, he was finally granted parole. But the governor of the state of California can overrule that decision of the parole board. And as you might know, one of the patrons, by the way, of the new French Laundry, Governor Gavin, American Psycho Newsom, reversed the decision of the California Parole Board, and Sirhan Sirhan, I think age 77 or 78, remains in prison, even though there is compelling evidence, forensic, as well as, if you want to call it psychology, forensic, we'll include that, or psychiatry. I don't trust the psychiatrists who are testifying on, I'll just tell you right now, on the behalf of Sirhan, or those who were saying he's a menace to society. Because by the time he went on trial, Sirhan Bishara, I'll just say Sirhan, okay, to make it quicker. Sirhan, by the time he was put on trial, the professional expertise of the psychologists and psychiatrists had been established. It took about 20, 30 years for it to become admissible in court. And one day it might be seen as some sort of passing phase in criminal justice. But for the time being, these individuals have standing in courts of law until the present day. And I already mentioned one such individual, William J. Bryan. Okay, who is this character? Well, let me, I've already teased you enough with this guy. Let's take a little voyage into Videoland. Right, here we go. You recognize, for all you TV rats or those who went to the drive-in theaters and grew up watching Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, right, as Dr. Watson, right? That's him in his older years. And by the way, one of the strategies that Roger Corman always used was to hire some of these actors who were still incredibly good, but they had seen better days so far as their film careers are concerned. And then, of course, you recognize the great Vincent Price there. And that's an excellent film. I couldn't find it on Netflix, so I had to order it from Bezos.com, and came up with this DVD. And I'd like to take a moment to ask people to support me on Patreon, because it's the Patreon people who allow me to go to Bezos.com and to get this DVD so I can make all these incredible connections so that we can move forward instead of being lost in this little monkey maze that's been set up for us, a cognitive monkey maze. Being in a hypnagogic state, nonetheless. So here's a little bit of a clip here, and I'm going to show you. This is where I said, aha, William J. Bryan Jr. What's he doing involved with a little cheapo Saturday morning Elvira horror film directed by or produced by Roger Corman? This one I'm going to show you, this was directed by Roger Corman. And it's an anthology. There's 3 different short story adaptations from Edgar Allan Poe. You can't make a better choice than that. Number one, it's public domain, no royalties involved. Secondly, most school kids, American and British school kids, know his work. We have to read it. It's a required reading. And third, Poe is very, very deep metaphysically and philosophically, and he is probing, I would think, some American, particularly ancestral memories that are very, very deep. That's a time for another talk. I'm going to have to do a talk on Poe, Poe himself, Edgar Allan Poe. But here's the intro to Tales of Terror, directed and produced by Roger Corman. You can see all our favorites. You've got Peter Lorre, right? He came to the U.S., by the way, I think through Erich von Stroheim. You know Peter Lorre from the film by Fritz Lang called M, Lustmord, where he murders a child. That's Peter Lorre. And of course, he had a huge career in America after that. And when he started to fade, of course, Roger Corman was there to cast him with Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, and and other characters as well. You know better than I. That's Pitalori. But here's the kicker. Here's where our friend William J. Bryan Jr., medical doctor, not PhD, medical doctor, comes in. And I'm going to spend some time looking on whale.com, otherwise known as Wikipedia, to give you some of the biographical highlights of Dr. Bryan. So here we go. I'm going to speed it up here. Now, this is the third short story in the anthology, but check out who the consultant. Okay, you've got the British connection here because as I'll get into, Roger Corman did spend a pretty good time on the GI Bill of Rights. You get educational benefits if you're in the U.S. military. For those of you who don't know, it's called the GI Bill of Rights. You can get a house, at least in the old days, with a lower mortgage. You get to go to college, and that's what he did. But he didn't go to Cal State Long Beach. He went to Oxford University. I'm talking about Roger Corman. So here's a British connection, technical advisor. Check out this. Here you go. Technical advisor for the hypnotism scenes. William J. Bryan Jr., medical doctor, the American Institute of Hypnosis. And this was based in Los Angeles. And according to his biography, Dr. Bryan might be the very first person who opened up a practice specifically for psychiatry on a consulting basis. Okay, that might not be so unusual to you. Oh, by the way, he wasn't just an MD. He performed the hat trick here. He was a JD, Juris Doctorate lawyer, right, medical school, and a PhD. And he's quite an overachiever. So that's not the really astounding part that I want to share with you, but he was a military psychiatrist. He was involved with CIA research, and this comes from Walesopedia, right? So it's got to be right, including Project Artichoke. This is Dr. Bryan. Project MK Ultra. You love to hear about that, right? But you never hear about William Joseph Bryan because most of the people who do shows like this are lost in a cognitive rat maze, thanks to Annie Jacobson and other YouTubers who just keep going around and round and round. I want to get out of the maze. I don't like being in a fun house. I want to break through it. I'm taking my mower and I'm cutting down the maze. Okay. So anyway, you get some idea. He was the founder of the American Institute of Hypnosis. Some of you might remember the Boston Strangler, Albert DeSalvo. He was the person that put Albert DeSalvo under a hypnotic trance to get him to confess to these multiple murders. And there's been more recently some question about whether Albert DeSalvo was the only person who was involved. All right. But William Joseph Bryan, getting to the Robert F. Kennedy assassination, is alleged to have been the handler for Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, who, as most of you know here in the chat room, had no memory of pulling the trigger, or at least pulling the trigger and killing presidential aspirant Robert F. Kennedy. He had no memory of it. He doesn't remember being there. He remembers seeing the woman in the polka dot dress. He remembers having a drink of coffee with her, and then all of a sudden going into an altered state of consciousness. He remembers that, but he doesn't remember assassinating Robert F. Kennedy. Not only does he not remember, but people who were there, eyewitnesses, have testified that there's no way that Sirhan Bishara Sirhan could have pulled the trigger. And I'm not going to go through all the different forensics it's been written about. Check out the most, I think the most important recent book, at least, it's by Lisa Peace. It came out in 2018. She's been a lifelong researcher on assassination, and her book is finally out. She thinks Sirhan should be paroled. I agree with her. So does Robert F. Kennedy Jr., by the way. The Kennedy family is kind of split on whether he should be paroled or not. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I admire And I admire the Kennedy family in general, and I don't really blame the children of Robert F. Kennedy and other family members if they still, for their position. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a mensch. He's a stand-up guy. He's got a new book coming up, I think next fairly soon. I'm looking forward to reading this. I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I'm saying this because the legacy doesn't die. You can assassinate an important political figure, and I'm pretty convinced that Robert F. Kennedy would have done wonders for American politics, society, and culture. And of course, that's why he had to be terminated with extreme prejudice by the Health Alteration Committee, right? Just like our other hopefuls in this area. But the legacy lives on. You're not going to ever murder that. You're not going to assassinate values and ideas. These are bedrock. These are part of our humanity. You're not even going to get rid of it through mRNA or through AI or recombinant DNA or GMO corn mazes. You're not going to do it. So stand down and let's have dinner. Let's go to the cafe in Napa. Like French Laundry in the old days was just a cafe for people who were working in Napa. It wasn't some hangout for some privileged dickhead like Gavin Newsom, who's part of the Getty criminal family in the state of California nationally. Getty, as in J. Paul Getty. So the Getty family is dedicated to make us live in the ghetto, right? Getty, ghetto, gettani, which, by the way, it's an Italian concept, gettani, ghetto, right? That's where they used to put all the Jews in one little area there. The ghetto is not synonymous with black people. It was originally meant for Jews, right? But now, as the group War once sang, the world is a ghetto. At least that's what the plan is. And the demoralization is also part of that. So here we go with William Joseph Bryan. Okay, there's more, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, there's more. I am the spokesperson for the Ginsu knife, right? You don't just get the Ginsu knife, you get all the accessories. So this is what I found, and I'm sharing with you. I'm fresh to market. Just like Sally Schmidt, she went right outdoors and picked out, she created the menu for whatever was sprouting that day. Oh, we've got some new limes there. Let's put it in here. Yeah, okay. So this is fresh to from farm to fork, as they say. Here you go. Let me put this on pause. There's no audio, it's just me yapping away. But this is from a film, the very first film, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And I don't have to read you his filmography, right? Does Godfather ring a bell? Yeah, that one. And then his daughters succeeded him. She even won an Academy Award. I don't think she has like as much talent as her dad, but I'm not going to argue that right now. This is his very first film produced by Roger Corman. It's called Dementia, or Dementia, if you prefer, 13. And this is the medical doctor on the right who's warning a newlywed that if she stays in this house, it's a castle in Ireland, that she might wind up dead like other beautiful women have. And a young girl, I think she was 10 or 11, was killed. She was drowned. That seems to be the MO, the modus operandus of the killer, who remains unknown until the very end. So I'm not going to spoil that for you, because guess what? It's being reissued. There's a director's cut, large, wide format. I might get it, but you could also see it on TubeView. You could also I think Dementia Tales of Terror on TubeView. So if you want to check it out, it's well worth it. The resolution is not good, but you get the idea. Yeah, this is the excerpts I got here. I'm sure going to get a copyright strike, but that's not the point. I want to show you. The important point is to show you the connection between Roger Corman, those cheesy drive-in films, these low budget. And by the way, he likes to brag, Roger Corman likes to brag, that he never lost a single dollar on any of his movies. And I thought it was because they were made so efficiently, right? That's what I was assuming. But really, what he's saying, because he's using twilight language, right? Right, double language, NLP, if you will, which I'll get to in a moment. What he means by not losing a single dollar in any of the movies he's made, because they were subsidized by guess who? The alphabet agencies, just like they are today, right? Or they launder money through. I'm not saying he ever did that, but um, films and large projects like creative projects are often music projects are often used for that purpose. So that's the premise of this movie. The doctor here, who carries a pistol, thank goodness, there's a spoiler alert, is warning the happy bride she hates him because he's raining on her the happiest day of her life. She doesn't want to listen to him, and she almost pays the price for it. See, she turns away from his wisdom right here. He knows what's going down. He he's not a hypnotist, he's a medical doctor, but he's better than a hypnotist. He's kind of almost like a priest, an old-fashioned priest, a priest who knows something about the human soul, not the one who likes to play with little boys' ding-dongs, but a person who's really in touch with of humanity and the larger world. That's him. He's a true doctor. And there used to be the medical doctors when I was a kid were more like him, by the way, not those jerkwads who you see at UC Davis Medical Center for like 10 minutes, right? They take your blood pressure and they weigh you, and then you see them and they try to put you on drugs, whatever. This guy is a medical. He's at the home. He's treating the mistress of the castle. So here's this. Okay, but here's the kicker. Let's take a look at the credits. I'm sorry, I skipped. Take a look at it. Let me get my face on. There you go again. Do you recognize that name? Produced by Roger Corman. I already told you that. Technical advisor. He's showing up again in another Roger Corman film. And the maiden voyage of the great director Francis, back then he was known as Coppola, but I guess he took on the Ford name. Maybe he is a Ford. Maybe he's the illegitimate bastard child of the Ford dynasty. We really don't know. We'll have to check him out. But he's definitely connected. He's connected like George Lucas. He's connected just like that whole generation of film makers that came out of UCLA and USC around the same time, and intern with Roger Corman, whose headquarters were in Los Angeles. And he was kind of like the guy who was going to give them postgraduate training and introduction into the film industry, Corman style, or should I say MI6 style or OSS style? I don't know. I haven't got to that point yet. I hope maybe you will. So let's turn to Roger Corman before I forget. And again, you could check out Jimmy Wales' Wikipedia, right? Jim, he's an operative, right? Wikipedia. And we find out that Roger Corman, I don't think I'll have time to show you a clip, but he's a very well-spoken, gentleman. He's a scholarly type. He's like someone if you went to Stanford University and you went to a humanities graduate seminar, he would be the professor running the graduate seminar on Dante or whoever else. But what did he study at Stanford? He majored in engineering. His father was an engineer. Now, it didn't work out for him. I don't know what happened. But I think he got some kind of word. Someone tapped him on the shoulder over at Stanford. Maybe it was one of the Terman family, right? There was a Terman Senior and a Terman Junior, right, who came up with the Stanford Binet intelligence testing, and they were engineers and all that. There might be a Terman connection up there, a Hewlett-Packard. I don't know. This is the world that Corman came out of it. He doesn't really talk about it. He's a little bit coy about it. They focus on his film career and the fact that he helped influence people like Peter Bogdanovich, right? The Last Picture Show. Martin Scorsese idolizes him. Ron Howard. I already mentioned Jonathan Demme. John Sayles, who I respect. James Cameron. That's what they focus on. I want to look at his biography. I want to know what his real the original spelling of his name. I think his name was anglicized. According to this, he's Roman Catholic, comes from a Roman Catholic family, but I bet he has a German roots. I bet it was spelled Corman, Korrrmin, and that's a corruption of corn man. By the way, we were just talking about cornfields and corn means. It's also an Ashkenazi name, Korman. Right? It has to do with rye and reaping, wheat and corn. Right. So Corman fits in perfectly. It articulates nicely with the talk of Tuesday. I didn't plan it that way. So we have to check and see if he's Ashkenazi, if he anglicized his name, because there was a heavy anti-German um, sentiment going back to World War I and going to World War II. German Americans talk about this. Older generation, it's okay to be German today in 2022, but they have the advantage of being able to. I don't consider it an advantage. I wouldn't anglicize my name. Besides, no one would really believe me if I showed up, you know, saying, "Yeah, I'm here for the job. My name's Daryl Hammond." Right? I can't anglicize my name. Conversely, you have black people, their names like William Jones. Like, what? I thought it was a white dude. So he's got to change his name to, you know, like a Swahili name, right? Because he gets confused, right? So Corman changed his name. I'm pretty sure we got to check that out. And that brings us into the British German intelligence world. He's already um, connected to Stanford. He's got a BS in industrial engineering, 1947. He did a stint in the U.S. Navy, I believe. He might have some ONI connection there. We got to check. I think he was probably being sheep dipped. All right, we're talking about the Bay Area here. He might have been, run into Lansdale at this time. It was, there's always these talent scouts out there grooming people like Roger Corman. And then all of a sudden he decides, hey, I don't want to be an engineer. I want to be a movie maker. And then he tells us his legend about starting in the back room, in the mail room, sort of like, what's that guy, David Geffen, legend. He supposedly started in the mail room and worked his way on top to become one of the movers and shakers of contemporary Hollywood, doing, upscale marquee prestige projects where Corman's going sort of bottom feeder type teeny bopper market, right? Low budget. So they can cover it all. And of course, he's connected with a number of Samuel Arkoff, distributors, King of the B movies, as they're called. Tons and tons of tells here. And as I mentioned before, and I'll reiterate, he did spend some time up in Oxford, supposedly studying literature on the GI Bill, and he's making movies in the UK. He financed. Why did he send Francis Coppola up to Ireland to make the films? These are all the films that people who supposedly do film studies should do. This is not something that I would have been allowed to get away with had they kept me on over at the film, because I taught there for 1 year. Had they kept me on at the film school over at UCLA, at the School of Film, Television, and Theater, because they don't want any type of scholarship that's going to undermine not the glamour, because they pretend not to be involved with that. The Academy. Well, we're film scholars, but they won't brook any sort of departure from the orthodoxy of what they call critical theory, right? Which is basically Marxist, and it has the gender and the race and all that stuff. But they won't really talk about the film industry as an intelligence operation, especially the one that shovels tons of money to them yearly. I'm talking about UCLA, where I was teaching. And back then, as I mentioned before, the temporary dean of the school, that's not just a department. Departments are subject to funds and all the different squabbles. UCLA has a school, so they have a funding source that's huge. It's like a college within a university. It's a school. And back then, when I was there, the dean of the school was none other than Gilbert Cates. He's the uncle of Phoebe Cates, by the way. It's all very much mixed in here. And he's produced all the Academy Awards and all. He's a big time producer, but he was so that's how close the connection was to the industry and the film school. That's why I wouldn't have been able to do the scholarship that's required now, but I'm doing it in 2022, and I'm lighting a fire under people who don't need to go to film school and don't even need to a graduate training, a degree, who can make a huge contribution to showing what the real impact is of these characters like William J. Bryan. Okay, so you're thinking perhaps, oh, here's Roger Corman. I'm going to show you how avuncular he is. He's grandfatherly. I think he's still alive. I think he might be 100 years old. I'm not sure. He was still working when he was in his 90s. Here he is.
Father was an engineer, and I went to college to Stanford as an engineering major, feeling that I would follow in his footsteps. It wasn't until my senior year that I realized engineering was not for me, and I was interested in films. But I could start over and take another major and spend an extra year in college, or I could just graduate. I felt, I just want to get out of here, I will graduate. The only job I could get, because Hollywood was a very tough place to get a job in those days, was as a messenger at Fox. Started as a messenger, worked my way up to a story analyst, and then really just wanted to go to Europe. And I'd had some time on the GI Bill, so I went to Oxford on the GI Bill, traveled around Europe.
Okay, I already relayed that information to you. Now you heard it from the man's mouth himself, so you know I'm not bugging out or making up stuff. Most of you trust me. Thank you very much. But always verify on your own. And you might pick up something that went over my head. That happens to me all the time. I mean, I can go years and say, how come I missed this the first time? So, go at it. So, okay, let's say I don't go to movies. But I've never been to. I don't know who Roger Corman is. Right, you're still affected by him because you live in this world, and unless you're a hermit, you probably had a working career, working for some institution, the police department. Maybe you were in the military, or you work in civil service, or a medium-sized family companies. The reason why they're destroying them is because they're not being programmed by these corporate level entities, these consultants that are run by psychiatrists and psychologists to screw up the workforce and make them obedient clowns, right? Hypno-programs, right? So let's say that you're one of the people who didn't grow up on a cornfield or a mom and pop store, which is most of the American population now. You probably got treated to some version of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Well, guess what? Dr. Bryan is held up as one of he didn't invent it, but because a couple of Stanford guys invented it, they took the research of their predecessors, people like William J. Bryan, and I don't know, maybe they saw how effective it was. They can get some guy like Sirhan Bishara Sahan, who was a Palestinian immigrant born in 1944, I believe, and his family immigrated to the U.S. in 1957. Yes, he had studied Roosevelt. And by the way, they were in Pasadena, which was the international headquarters of Theosophy. Jack, Whiteside Parson. I gave you that rundown before. Pasadena is a very important geographic space, your geopolitical space that goes way beyond the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or Van Halen, right? So there's another area that you need to talk about. It's not all just Jekyll Island, the creature from Jekyll Island. That's an important book. Everybody should read that. But there are other areas as well that'll help us get out of this maze. So if you were a working person for the last 40, 50 years, you've probably been indoctrinated with some version of management training or consultants. And I've been through these programs. The UC was always putting us through. And I've also had working lives at other fairly large corporations. They had this huge industry of business management consultants. Well, here's a connection to Roger Corman, to Dr. Bryan, to the films, to Stanford University again through neurolinguistic programming, which is alive and well. And there were two people in my department who practiced. There was a director. She was director of mine. She practiced NLP. I said, "You're doing NLP." Because they go to the seminars to get advanced training. And another one, South Asian woman, she would, whenever I make a statement, she would restate it and rephrase it. And she said, "That's what you mean, don't you?" And you're supposed to go, "Yes, master. Yes." So if anybody does that to you, you're making an opinion in a public meeting or in a classroom or in a seminar, and you have some ass clown who's been through the NLP training and they're rephrasing what you're saying so that it'll change what your intention, you know that you're being treated to NLP. So here you go. Let's take a I'll blow it up a little bit. If you can't see, I don't know, I can't read it. But that is a tribute to Milton H. Erickson. And I was looking at this and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's John Grinder who wrote this." Let's take a look at it again. Can you see it below there? I can't read it on my screen here unless I blow it up. And I said, "I remember that name, John Grinder." I said, "He's one of the co-founders of neurolinguistic programming." And who's Milton Erickson? Milton Erickson is one of the godfathers of hypnotism. And who's a hypnotist? William J. Bryan Jr. Right. And there were other hypnotists, by the way, who were on the side of Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, who said he's under hypnagogic training, right? And they suspect it was being done by William J. Bryan on the behalf of one of the alphabet agencies, right? In fact, one of these people who were on the side of Sirhan Sirhan said in front of reporters, saying, "I'm going to pull a trigger. I'm going to pull out my handkerchief. And when I do, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan is going to spontaneously start climbing the bars of this cell and not know why he did it." And indeed, this went on. He was highly suggestible, Sirhan Sirhan. It's not me saying that. Here's another book that you might want to read. Came out in 1970. It's still worth it. Robert Blair Kaiser, RFK Must Die. Like I said, there's a ton of literature on it, but I can't go through all of it here. So let me just briefly tell you about Milton H. Erickson, because I told you I don't trust any of these people, the ones that are defending, the psychiatrists and psychologists, therapists who are defending Sirhan Sirhan, or the ones who were handling him or had programmed him to shoot Robert Kennedy. And I agree with that that argument that he was programmed, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to subscribe to the working methods of these people, the psychiatrists, or their counters. Because as we know, that even if they're on, this happens in the law all the time. You have people who are supposedly these lawyers who are arguing on the behalf of the victims, but they're all working together, with the other side. I know this in my own case, being represented against the University of California. The guy that was representing me is playing on he's working on both sides of the street because his loyalty is to the bar, and same way with the psychiatrists. Their loyalty is their own colleagues. So I'm just telling you this so that if you're ever in one of these situations, you'll think twice about it. It works for some people. I'm just giving you the heads up on how it works in real life. So I came across this article. I'll post it on my Patreon group here. It's called The Shadow Side of the Great Psychotherapist, because you might want to know why I have such a negative attitude towards these people. And it's done by a psychotherapist himself. How's that? His name's Timothy C. Thomason. Dr. Bitch, he's a professor of educational psychology, Northern Arizona University. I tend to go to academic articles instead of Google, right? Or through YouTube. I'd like to go closer to the source, not because I'm better, but because I find it yields more original insights than the rat maze epistemology that we seem to be locked into, we being the supposedly independent-minded people. So he comes from this world and catalogs not just Milton Erickson, but people that we know and trust, like Carl Rogers. I thought he was the father of humanistic psychology. All this stuff was being fed to us when we were, you know, undergraduates. He was an alky, total. Fritz Perls, his children hated him, right? Transact Albert Ellis, total. And then, of course, Milton Erickson, who used to have, when they're clients, right? This is a professional relationship. Right? This is I don't know if it's accepted practice, but he would have women partially in dress and tell them to do nasty type behaviors. And he would do it with a very heavy authoritarian air, and they would do it. And he's claiming success. There's no empirical information or research that backs his assertions, his self-reporting. But there's a Milton H. Erickson Institute today that are trying to advance his work. So you see how deeply ingrained has this process, which I call the hypno-programming, how thoroughly integrated it has become into our everyday lives. And unless we start questioning the premises and reading the real stories of all these perverts, right, or reading books by Jeffrey Musafiet Masson, who I've referred to before, it's called Against Therapy. It's a real good book. It was published way back in 1980. And this is a guy, Masson, who was slated to become the head of the Freud archive. He was the Wunderkind. He was the heir apparent to the great Anna Freud herself, who, as we know, is the maven of child psychology in America that screwed up several generations of American chillins. Right? I call them chillins because I like the chillins of John Lee Hooker, boogie chillins, not the children of Anna Freud and Dr. Peter Neubauer and all the Jewish Nazis that came in after the war. We talk about the sexy Nazis of paperclip. There were the intelligentsia of the Jewish paperclip people that we don't talk. That's one of the reasons why we got to break out of the cognitive rat maze, so that full accountability can be done, and so that we can question the types of ordeals that our children today in 2022, the head games, are being put through. And they don't even have to go to the psychiatrist's office now. They can just go with this with the dark mirror and program with one of their killer apps. Oh, any advertising that says, "Oh, this is killer," I don't buy it. Whatever it is, oh, this is a killer instrument. This is yeah, forget it. You're not going to get you're not going to get a single cent from me. And if your name is Black Sabbath or whatever it is, or you're selling a movie like Don't Fear the Reaper. Oh, by the way, speaking of reapers, Corman being the reaper of rye, of wheat, of corn. Does that ring a bell? J.D. Salinger, or Salinger, right? Who was had some trauma when he was overseas and was in part of intelligence, wrote these trigger books and short stories funded by the New Yorker, which is part of the literary connection there, and Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye, yeah, that he, he has this fantasy, right, that he's going to be the savior of children. He's going to catch them as they're wandering through the high rye, like in a cornfield, before they plunge off the cliff into the abyss. Right. So here you go, another maze of death, which, by the way, is a title of a novel or novella by Philip K. Dick, who I've given a talk on quite a while ago, and he was a Bay Area person himself. He wrote a book called A Maze of Death. Okay, one other function that, as I end off here, that the American International Films and all the different companies that Roger Corman, they're very gentlemanly, scholarly, college-educated, engineering graduate, military veteran, Oxford-trained intellectual, right? Another one of his functions is to create honey traps. He's in the film business, after all, right? You've heard about we went through the Me Too movement, and you read the book, the autobiographies, and the revelations, right? The great autobiography, Rose McGowan, very brave woman, smart. All these people are the actors and actresses, performers, musicians. They're very smart. They have a different way of communicating, but they got it up here because they also understand human beings. They have emotional intelligence that many people lack, except for the people who want to screw with our behavior, like Dr. Bryan, right? And that's one of the characteristics of these psychopaths, like Dr. Pachenik. Yeah, blowing smoke up people's butts and then smirking about it. It's called the psychopathic smirk, right? So they're very smart, and we got to be smart as them and smarter. And we also have to have the will to not submit to their seeming professional authority because it's smoke and mirrors. So anyway, before I run out of time, let me go into this one glaring case of honey trap setting, compromising, probably involving, not probably, admittedly involving uh, intelligence agencies. Here we go. And I don't know if you could see that, but the gentleman on the left is the late Shah of Iran. And most of you know, you've read the books by William Blum, Destroying Democracy, you know, the control of Iran, you know, about the Iranian quote unquote revolution, the synthetic revolution, you know, about the October surprise, how Jimmy Carter was diselected, and then the CIA's own man got in. So they had to create a revolution. That's King Hussein. He was married 3 times. And the beautiful one on the right, her maiden name is Lisa. I always thought it was Halaby, but I think that's an anglicization of her name as pronounced in Arabic, which would be Halabi. So that is Lisa Halabi. And her middle name is Najib. And her father, Najib Halabi, was part of the Christian Syrian Lebanese minority that are not really talked about. We need to talk about people like Ralph Nader, for example, Armenian American. His sister, Ralph Nader, by the way, now if you don't know, is compromised. Right, he's the guy that supposedly helped us get seat belts on our cars. Maybe he did, but anyway, I'm getting off topic. There's a whole group of Christian Arabs in the U.S., such as Najib Halabi, or her name is Queen Noor. It's her official name. She still has that title today. Well, she was married to King Hussein in 1974, but not before this character here
Came back, got a job as a literary agent, and wrote.
If there's another tell. He directed a film called the Wasp Woman, which I've seen. It's excellent. And what happened is that when King Hussein came to visit America, let me get it directly here. Yeah, I'm getting this from the authoritative Jimmy Wales site. It says, according to research done in 2010 for the PBS series, this is by Professor Henry Louis Gates, who was doing these genealogical DNA-oriented vignettes. The series. He's at Harvard University. He found out that well, he found the whole history of the Halabi family, but he did not go far enough to discover that King Hussein, this is before he married Halabi, was set up with one of the main actresses of Roger Corman. Her name was, let's see, what's her name? Does it matter? I don't have that information at hand, but she had a name. She had a Goyish name because her name was, her real name was Harriet Shapiro. Again, you can anglicize your name if you can pass, right? Her name was Harriet Shapiro, but her real name was Susan Corbett or something like that. But somebody set them up on orders of the American intelligence agency so that King Hussein would be even more of an asset for the bloodlines of America, the Anglo-American intelligence banking combine. So that was a part of the American International, or the Roar, because it happened under his watch. Whether he knew about it or not, I don't know. Maybe he's practicing plausible deniability. But that is a part of the film history of this guy who's lionized as being this genius mentor, all of these incredible American directors. This is, he was his true function. All the rest of it, yeah, fine and dandy. I like the work of most of those directors. But this is the cultural forensics of Hollywood circa late 50s through the present, because his influence, Roger Corman's influence, is still being felt, not just in the movies, but for the general hypnagogic neuro NLP media influence that we all know about, with political resonance that comes down to Sirhan Bishara Sirhan still languishing in prison when he should have been out years ago, because there's not even enough compelling forensic and eyewitness evidence to say that he even shot Robert F. Kennedy, presidential aspirant. I was going to show you aspirant, not aspirin. He was almost a shoo-in to have become U.S. president, I would say. Not just me, experts who follow this. I was going to show you some clips of the assassination. I'm running out of time. I just, maybe I'll do it next time, just a little bit brief. But I do have a personal anecdote, because what is a Professor Hamamoto show without a personal anecdote? But I was with my friend Carl Boggs, who's the guy that introduced Antonio Gramsci, now known as cultural Marxism. Right? It's not as bad as that, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care what some of these people who name check them. He's the guy that introduced Gramsci in English to America, Carl Boggs. I was walking, because we were visiting Berkeley, UC Berkeley. We were walking down Telegraph Avenue. It's all crowded by panhandlers, right? and crappy restaurants. Stay away from Telegraph, Telly. But we were walking down Telly, and he runs into this tall, distinguished gentleman, and they're old-time buddies, and they shake hands, and we're moving in other directions, and so they didn't really chat. So my friend Carl turns to me and says, "You know who that was?" I said, "No, I don't recognize him." He said, "That was Paul Schrade." He said, "Paul Schrade was one of the guys who was hit by the bullet at the Kennedy assassination." And sure enough, he's in the documentaries. And I mention this because Paul Schrade himself said that Sirhan Bishara Sirhan did not kill Kennedy. And he's also one of, I think he might have passed away, but he was one of the vocal supporters of Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, that he be paroled. So that was my brush with the John F. Kennedy assassination episode, a sad episode in American life. Yeah, it certainly altered the course of what I thought was the America. I started to wonder and start having these questions even as a boy, about what America was about, because we're talking about the assassination of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the attempted assassination of Governor George Wallace. I mean, I can go on and on and on, as well as JFK. So anyway, I'm going to end at this point. Keep your guard up. Be vigilant. Let's escape the hypnagogic control grid, the cognitive maze that have been set. We can do it, right? Sally Schmidt did it, right? She's from Roseville, Sacramento County. There were no women chefs back then. She came out of home economics at UC Davis. She built a business with her husband that helped support her family. All right, that's just one example of many. I want to accentuate that. And there are many people who have been through horrendous conditioning. I've spoke of them or alluded to them in previous talks. They have escaped. They have written books about their odyssey and how they have regained health. The most I don't know if the most recent, maybe she's written another one, but the most recent book that I read of that of Kathy O'Brien's is required reading. And I'm telling you this because people supposedly on our side are part of the demoralization process, and we have to reject it. That's why I never watch these shows anymore. I'm looking for growth. I'm looking for alternatives. I'm looking to regain the garden. All right. We'll get there, ladies and gentlemen. All right. And by the way, I have some good news for you. I know I'm running way over time today, but I got word from one of the great authors, not just currently, but of years past, Anton Chaikin, and we're going to have a live stream next week. I won't tell you which one day it is. So subscribe so you get all notifications. And it's going to be an incredible conversation because I've been, I read his most recent book, but I've also been boning up on the whole backstory of LaRouche. Probably a lot of it has to do with today's talk. I'm going to ask him about some of these strategies that were being used to undermine the efforts of Lyndon LaRouche and the organization. So you see that these talks do have uh, relevance to 2022. I'm not just making it up. All right, and you know this, but I thank you for the newbies who are indulging me. Check out all my references here, subscribe, and don't nitpick me by saying, "Oh, it's Pacific Daylight Time." I know that, asshole. All right, thank you very much. Bye. I'm sorry for calling you an asshole. I should be more generous than that. You're just a dick. That's all. Okay, thank you. Bye.